Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a landmark case born out of a tragic accident, one that completely transformed South Africa's legal landscape. We're looking at the Supreme Court of Appeals judgment in the Amod case, and trust me, it is a fascinating journey through law, morality, and how a society actually decides whose rights are worth protecting.
So, think about this for a second. Should an insurance payout depend on the religion of your marriage ceremony? Imagine losing your spouse in a fatal crash. Your whole world turned upside down, only to have an insurance fund tell you that legally, your marriage just doesn't count. It sounds unthinkable today, but that is exactly where our story begins.
Chapter 1. A widow's claim denied.
At the heart of this incredibly complex legal maze is the very real, very human story of a woman named Hafiza Amod. Hafiza and her husband, Umar, were married in 1987 in a serious, de facto monogamous union under Islamic law. Then, the unthinkable happens. July 25, 1993, Umar is killed in a car collision caused entirely by the negligent driving of another motorist. Naturally, Hafiza files a claim against the Multilateral Motor Vehicle Accidents Fund for the loss of her husband's support. The fund accepted the claim for their children without a problem, but they completely repudiated, just flat-out rejected Hafiza's own claim.
Why? Well, the crucial point here is that her marriage was an Islamic contract. It wasn't a registered civil marriage under South Africa's 1961 Marriage Act. Because of that, the legal establishment basically said, sorry, we owe you absolutely nothing. Even though she was a grieving widow who relied on her husband, the law's stance was essentially that they didn't recognize her union.
Section 2. The dependent's action explained.
Okay, so to understand how a court could justify this, we gotta step back and look at the legal machinery at play. Specifically, a common law concept called the dependent's action. And at the very center of that is a Latin phrase, boni mores. What does that mean? It roughly translates to the moral sense of the community. In Roman Dutch common law, boni mores actually dictates whether a specific right is worthy of protection by the law. This entire legal battle hinges on this one concept. Essentially, does society's moral compass recognize you?
And this brings us to a four-part test. Based on a legal precedent called Santan BPK v. Henry, a claimant actually has to prove four specific things to succeed in a dependent's action. Now, the first two parts are straightforward. The deceased had a duty to support the dependent, and that duty was legally enforceable. In Hafiza's case, everybody, even the defense, agreed Umar had a legally enforceable contractual duty to support her under Islamic law. It was steps 3 and 4, proving her right to support was worthy of legal protection and that this protection was justified by boni mores, where everything kind of fell apart.
The real friction happens right at that fourth step. This was the ultimate barrier. Was a Muslim widow's right to support actually justified by the boni mores of South Africa? Did the moral compass of the community at that time believe an Islamic marriage was legally worthy of protection? For decades, the courts had said no.
Section 3. Shifting the moral code.
Now, this exposes a massive, fundamental contrast in South Africa's legal history. Let's think about the old ethos from the 1860s. Back then, and honestly for over a century after, the culturally dominant establishment only recognized Christian marriages. Other unions, like Islamic marriages, were dismissed as recognized concubinage or considered legally invalid because they were deemed potentially polygamous. But then we have the new ethos emerging by 1993. This was a completely different framework, one based on tolerance, pluralism, and religious freedom. Under this new ethos, public policy is dictated by values shared by the community at large, not just one single dominant group imposing its will. You can actually trace how this new ethos built up over time. The defense tried to rely on old, discriminatory case law, but the court pointed out that by July 1993, a brand new ethos of tolerance was already firmly consolidated. The progression is clear. In 1989, a massive law commission report on group and human rights was published. In 1990, previously prohibited political movements were unbanned. And from 1991 to 1993, the crucial Kudesa negotiations took place to transition the country. So by the time the cause of action occurred in July 1993, the nation's moral compass had fundamentally, irreversibly shifted.
Section 4. The groundbreaking verdict.
Armed with this newly established, inclusive moral code, Chief Justice Mahomed and the Supreme Court of Appeal had to make a final call on Hafiza's fate, and they upheld her claim. Their reasoning is incredibly powerful. They highlighted that her Islamic marriage wasn't just some casual arrangement. It was a serious, de facto monogamous union that involved a public ceremony and onerous obligations.
The court ruled that it was utterly indefensible to deny common law protection to this solemn Islamic marriage while happily granting it to Christian or customary marriages. Doing that would be arbitrary and completely unequal. The duty of support in her marriage was fully worthy of common law protection.
But, legal battles always have pushback. The defense raised a pretty significant question. If the court recognizes this one contractual duty from an Islamic marriage, wouldn't they have to recognize every single aspect and rule of Islamic law? It's the classic slippery slope argument, right?
Well, the Chief Justice elegantly bypassed this trap. He stated clearly that recognizing one incident of a marriage for a special purpose does not mean recognizing any other incident of that marriage. It's a vital distinction. The court clarified that the law can, and absolutely should, recognize the duty of support simply to prevent a severe injustice, without getting hopelessly entangled in religiously controversial doctrines. They were focused on ensuring a widow wasn't left destitute, not making sweeping religious rulings.
And because of this profound legal pivot, the court handed down a very specific order: 250,000 rand. The fund was ordered to pay Hafiza Amod this agreed-upon sum in damages for the loss of her husband's support. It was a massive victory that righted a historical wrong.
Section 5. The law evolves. It's so crucial to understand that this victory wasn't just about a financial payout for one woman. It was a fundamental, game-changing statement about what the law actually is. The core idea here is that the common law constantly evolves to accommodate changing values and new needs. Think of the common law not as some rigid, dusty book of old rules locked away in a vault, but as a living, breathing organism. To survive, to maintain its legitimacy, and to actually serve the people, it literally has to adapt its parameters as society grows.
This brings us to an incredibly powerful quote from Chief Justice Mahomed. The common law is not to be trapped within the limitations of its past. That right there, that is the absolute core of this explainer. It brilliantly illustrates that true justice requires the law to shed the prejudices of history. The law absolutely must look forward, not just backward.
So I want to leave you with this final thought. If our laws fail to adapt to our modern values, do they lose their legitimacy to deliver justice entirely? The Amod case proves that the law has to reflect all of us: our pluralism, our tolerance, our shared humanity. It really forces us to ask how our own legal systems around the world need to evolve today to ensure absolutely no one is left behind by the limitations of the past. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.